asked my friend for shelter during my mother's medical emergency. She agreed, but suddenly she's gone cold.
Wow, our mom is having a medical emergency.
Yeah.
We're just going to pull out.
Really quick, before we get into the story, there is a lot of talk of cancer and the hospital and the passing of a loved one. So if that's not something that you can listen to right now, go ahead and skip to the next story. Guys, and this is a direct from the subreddit, direct from OKstorytime.
Pinky the Slayer.
This is one of ours. I, 28 female, met my best friend Jay, 27 female, and we will call her Jenny, when we were 10 years old. We met on her first day of moving to my school, and we'd been joined at the hip ever since. She's been the closest thing I have to a sister. I'd left the hometown Jenny and I grew up in when I was 18 and moved 2 hours away. By the way, this comes from user Outlandishness58, and if you want to submit your own stories, go to the r/okstorytime subreddit. So I visited her and took long train trips often, but she wouldn't make the effort for me. She reasoned that I had somewhere to stay, my mom's place, but trains run between our cities every half hour, so it is more than possible to do day trips. People commute between our cities daily. To this day, she only did this trip 3 or so times to get a tattoo done or for concerts. But she never spent time with me. I did day trips nearly every second week for 5 years, but I let that pass. She also didn't try to learn about my life here, ask about my friends, or what I like to do the whole time I've been here. I also let it pass. It seemed our friendship only existed in the confines of our old city. She also became very bad at communication. I would barely get a conversation out of her for sometimes months on end. She didn't fill me in on big or small things that happened in her life, and I had to find things out myself. All that. Yet, when we finally would meet up, we would get along as if no time had passed. So I let it slide. I'd also noticed that our banter had kind of changed in the last year or so. We would normally tease each other a lot, and it was low stakes, and we knew each other's boundaries. It was all just for laughs. But lately, I've felt something underlying in her jokes.
Oh.
She's judging me for not being the same girl I was as a teenager when we saw each other all the time. Reading between the lines, I feel as if she looks down on me for some reason. But it wasn't too big of an issue, so I let it pass. Now, onto the straw that broke the metaphorical camel's back. I lost my mom to cancer mid last year. And Jenny knew from the beginning, as we talked about how I was dealing with knowing I could lose the most wonderful mom in the world. Man, sorry, OP, that's terrible.
It's tragic.
Jenny came on the first day Mom went into the hospital and sat with me all day. It felt good to have the presence of my best friend, a feeling I hadn't felt in a while. Now, at this time, I was looking for a place to stay in my home city. I'm very used to commuting, but I needed to be close just in case my mother's condition changed, which it often did. It was pancreatic cancer, and it's literally the manifestation of the devil on earth, I swear. If I went home, it would take me a total of 2.5 hours to get to her. Train plus the bus to get to the train. Plus, it was post-vid lockdowns, and I didn't want to be picking up germs in public transport. I don't have a car, and bringing them to my extremely immunocompromised mother. So I asked Jenny if I could crash just for a few nights at her place. She still lives at home as her parents agreed when she was younger for her to save the money she gets from work so she could afford a house down payment. We live in a very expensive country. She said yes, and her parents said yes. I thought things were gravy. I had a place to eat and sleep in the evening, and my family from out in the area had their little Airbnb a little further from town, but it didn't take long before I suddenly felt a change.
I just remembered a very sad, tragic tale.
Oh, what is it?
I remember when a young Samuel Donner, he wanted to join the cool kids, but instead of labeling you as one of the cool kids,
They called me Salad Boy because I ate nothing but salads. Could not trade my lunch for a lunch.
cheese
Really
drippy,
anything.
You know what community will always welcome you with open arms, Sam?
And make you feel like a cool kid?
The great people who have OK Storytime memberships.
Oh, I heard that's 60+ hours of members-only content Monday, Wednesday, Fridays.
You heard right, Sam, and it's only $5 a month.
So go to the link in our description, youtube.com/OKOP show/join. Now back to the story.
Chomp, chomp.
It was a hard period. There was so much vitriol happening around my mother's passing. The hospital was an excruciating place to be, as people were not handling impending grief well. I felt really ignored during this whole process. I was sad and lonely when my immediate family wasn't in the hospital while these fights were happening around me, and I needed someone to talk about nice and unrelated things to not think about my mother's condition. But each night I stayed at Jenny's home, I felt more unwelcome. Her parents were lovely. They made me food and chatted about how I felt for a little bit. Then we watched some crap TV before going to sleep. Then the next morning, I'd leave early to go to the hospital. Jenny rarely spoke to me when I was there. I could feel she didn't want me in her home, but she wouldn't say anything even when I asked what was wrong. It was the third night when I pried it out of her that she felt uncomfortable with me being there because she was overwhelmed thinking about my sick mother. Now, to be clear, I never want to cross people's emotional boundaries, but I was in a place where I needed security on where I was staying and somewhere non-stressful to be after the horrible days at the hospital. I wish she had just told the truth at the beginning that she wasn't comfortable, and I would have respected that, which honestly is wild for you to say.
What?
That you would have respected your best friend that you've gone out of your way to be available for years would be like, oh, actually, your mom being sick is too much of a problem for me to deal with. You can't stay at my house. That'd be like, oh, so we're enemies, actually? So you don't like me at all. Got it. Okay.
And her being silent was probably her trying to control her emotional reaction, and finally she just had to say, like, I'm just uncomfortable. And I don't know if it has something to do with like her lack of morality, but more of just like passing is hard, and some people don't have the capacity to support people.
It is hard to be around emotionally heavy stuff, right? And like, you know, losing a loved one, a sick loved one, that's hard to be around. But it's like, I don't know, it doesn't sound like OP was bringing all of that back into the home. Like she said, like literally I needed a place to go where I didn't have to think about this, where I didn't have to talk about it.
Sure.
And it's like,
but I think it's just the context around it.
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
It just feels
OP.
like, for me, for this to be your best friend, that's not your best friend. If this was my best friend, I get that it can be hard. This is not a best friend. The next day was one of the worst days in the hospital. There was worse fighting between families, and all I remember from that day was crying to a nurse and being catatonic in the corner of a room. I knew I couldn't go to Jenny. I couldn't stay with my stepdad. He was part of the hospital problems, and my family's Airbnb was full. Plus, at the time, I could not afford to contribute as I wasn't working. I was preparing to bite the bullet and go back to my city despite the terrible weather and the lateness of the night. Luckily, my cousin intercepted and told me to come to their Airbnb anyway.
Oh, good.
I had a bit of a breakdown that night, but ultimately was so happy to be around loving people in such a hard time. I wish I had just stayed with them in the first place. Maybe all this wouldn't have happened, but hindsight is 20/20. After this, the communication gaps between me and Jenny got worse. Even my aunt noticed at the funeral that Jenny seemed withdrawn from me. She didn't say hello to me. I came over to greet Jenny and her mother to thank them for coming. I was just happy to see her come to say farewell to my mother. After I returned permanently to my city, we did video chat together for a few days, and Jenny was very supportive, but then things returned to the old ways. Months passed, I'd get a message or a response here and there, but it's gotten to the point where I just don't want to tell her things anymore. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I just had no desire to try and maintain this friendship. I mean, it sounds like you just finally picked up the hint. Now you're just reciprocating the same energy that you're getting, which is totally fair.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like the relationship has been distancing and no party has been making an effort to bring closeness in for a long time. So it makes sense that.
Well,
if
OP hadn't been doing it the whole time, there wouldn't have been. After she moved out of town, if she wasn't the one maintaining this relationship, Jenny wouldn't have. Her friend wouldn't have maintained it. I've become hyper aware of all the changes in our dynamic that I described at the beginning and what happened when I was staying at her place. But I feel guilty for making her feel uncomfortable. But I also maintain the fact she should not have treated me so coldly and should have told me how she was feeling when she started becoming uncomfortable. I needed a secure space to sleep, and I could have made other plans. Also, I did not need to go through this extra stress of feeling like a burden to her when it could have been avoided. I'm a grown adult. I would work out myself where to go. I've not spoken to her since early December. We didn't message each other at Christmas nor at New Year's, a time we'd often hang out together. She looks at my Instagram stories but doesn't interact, and I'm not upset about it. I'm apathetic to it. I'm focusing more on the friendships in my current city who don't understand why I feel guilty for being upset about the whole thing. If Jenny or any of my friends needed a place to stay while their last parent was passing away, I'd give them my bed and sleep on the floor if I had to. But I can't go around projecting my standards onto other people. That wouldn't be right of me. But by the way, it'll always be right for you to listen to full episodes with stories like this. All you have to do is go to Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts and search OK Storytime. And there you have the whole catalog to peruse at your leisure. We do have a little bit more story here, but I think, it's totally reasonable for the apathy to have struck, I think. I don't know what happened. I don't know if there's even a need to get to the bottom of what happened in regards to why Jenny got so cold and distant. It's just c'est la vie. Life moves on. Sometimes, people will be lined up in their lives, and at some point they'll go like that. Mm-hmm. And now they are no longer lined up. Yeah. And maybe one day they'll come back together, but it sounds like this person has zero interest in maintaining a relationship with you, OP. So by all means, it's time to focus on the people who do care about you still. Let's finish this story though. Let's get to the end here. I feel like a bit of an a-hole for not trying to communicate during the end of 2024, but at the same time, she didn't message me either. So I'm in two minds about it. I still feel upset thinking about the fact I made her uncomfortable in her own home, even when I didn't have bad intentions, though the community here might be able to shed some light on any biases I have. So nearly a year later, I still feel like I'm in two minds about how it all went south between us and that perhaps I was the cause. No, you were the only thing saving that relationship. That's the end of the story. But no, you were the only thing keeping that relationship afloat for years. So it's okay. You can let it go, move on. You'll be better for it. And, maybe one day Jenny will reach out and express herself fully to you, but it's not on you to try to coax that out of her.